Right. So first of all, thank you very much. I would like to say on behalf from the Copenhagen Business School team that we really want to thank Ihasa for having us here and for also supporting the entire project and also to all our project partners. So Politecnico di Torino, basically University of Sussex, and then there's also Roskilde University over there. So what I'm going to do today is basically, right, I keep forgetting this. So what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to talk to you through a little bit more of the team. So not all of the team is here because a lot of them are also busy with some things on the side. It also happens to clash with Easter break, and so some of them are unable to turn up because of that, even though many of them would have liked to be here. And then so after that, it's also a little bit on the motivation of why we're doing this. So I think both it has been covered a little bit over here, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into sort of the academic and then the sort of policy making consequences of why we're doing what we're doing. A little bit on the study design, early findings, and then the recap. So what does this mean for us based on the very early findings? So the first thing is I want to say that, first of all, the team is quite big. And so this is also the reason why things have been moving sometimes a little bit more like a sort of an oil tanker versus what we expected to be moving. And on top of it, we also have 4 additional partners from 4 different universities. And these basically work with the translation for the other countries. So into Polish, checking for the US survey, also checking for the Finnish survey, and also checking for the Norwegian survey. So what's happening over here now, so I'll just turn a little bit more into the motivation, right? So in the broader team, I mean, I can introduce later on like the broader team, but let's dive a little bit over here into sort of the core details of what we're doing. So one of the things why we're really interested in what we're looking at is because advanced democracies are confronted by an intensification of numerous challenges, right? So it's not just a single challenge, like you're not just talking about digitalization. Neither are you just talking about sort of population aging. But all of these things are coming together and sort of an intensification within this decade. And so that makes it even more sort of interesting as an academic, but relevant for policymakers to know how do these different things intersect? What do we do about it? And more concretely, what does the public want to do, right? Because that has sort of political implications in terms of how they vote, what they do they go on strike, and is there a certain level of political discontent that is actually, at least in Europe, that has been a little bit sort of problematic, right? To sort of actually push for these kind of certain reforms, right? And almost an example is the green transition reform. Right at the point when you need it most, it might be the situation that actually people resist it the most. And then that obviously has knock-on consequences for the planet, right? So these are some of the things that we tried to basically look over here. And for Europe especially, I mean, like something that we don't really speak about that much previously, but due to what had happened in 2021, obviously, was it 2022? Sorry, 2022, right? The issue with war. So this is something that has come forth. So the second reason why we do what we do is also because as I said earlier, right? So public opinion matters because it may influence to various extents, right? Decision makers' actions and choices. I'm talking about decision makers over here, not just in terms of politicians, but you're also talking about, for instance, unions. For instance, you're talking about also businesses. You're also talking about employer associations, right? So all of these can make sort of concrete decisions, and some of them are responding to certain segments of the electorate or not. And obviously, again, all of these have knock-on consequences of when I choose to respond, what happens after that? That's all shaping the general discourse that we present on a certain issue, right? And then what happens over here is that at the academic level, there's a lot of rich public opinion research on individual challenges. And a lot of us over here have worked on some of these, right? So some of us work individually on green transition, some of us work on globalization, some of us work on automation and digitalization. And also in Kihasa, I know a lot of you have also worked individually on these themes. But what seems to be missing at the point where we are at the point of sort of intensification of these challenges is something where we explore how some of these challenges at the public opinion level overlap, right? So does the public view some challenges as more important than others that they want addressed? Do they view some as less important? And that's also the question, a sort of differentiation between what we want at a policy making level and what the public wants. Right? The moment you have that sort of discord and dissonance between the two, that's sort of a potential for political discontent, which sort of then erodes away any political trust that is generated over the past few periods, and that's problematic. So So going a little bit back over here, this is what we try to do over here, right? So we try to basically provide a sort of integrated understanding of how the public perceives this sort of what Zeitlin et al. Call sort of this polycrises. Basically, you have basically multiple crises coming together, and how does the public look at it? Over here, what we're trying to look at is what does the public worry about, what do they want, and what are they willing to trade off? So essentially, if you were just to sum it up, sort of salience, hierarchy, sort of policy demands, and policy trade-offs. So I'm going to move a little bit into the data over here. So what do, right? One of the problems, and there are two problems over here. One of the problems is that a lot of the existing stock data sets that you can get from basically, like for instance, the International Social Survey Program or the European Social Survey, these are all very focused on individual challenges where they ask, right? They are very useful in the sense that you can get these data sets, online, they're publicly accessible. The problem is that they're not customized to ask the specific questions that we are interested in. First of all, in comparing these different challenges, and secondly, the very specific sort of policy trade-offs. A lot of these ask, do you worry about this challenge or not, right? It doesn't push the sort of boundary far enough that you need to know at a policy-making level. So what do I do? What do I need to do in terms of that? So what do we do? So basically, then this is what we do, right? So we basically brought together a team, right, including as well Kihasa, where everyone is sort of working together to try to design this survey. The second thing, and I want to stress this as actually as a very important thing, a lot of the conversation coming up over here when we talk about, and essentially a lot of this is sort of public opinion within a comparative political economy perspective. A lot of the political economy literature is very centered around the US and Europe. Not enough on it is done on Korea, not enough of it is done from Japan. I'm from Singapore, so not enough of it is done from Singapore, from the perspective of Singapore as well. So there's one reason why for us it was really essential to have Kihasa on board as well, and to also have Korea included, because of in a lot of the data sets that we have, we don't have Korea as a comparative case at a public opinion level. So I'm not talking about the aggregate level, right? At the aggregate level, you have OECD data, right? You also have World Bank data. But at a public opinion level, that makes it very difficult to compare when Korea, despite the fact that it's facing unique challenges, is also facing similar challenges as many advanced economies, right? We can talk about apples and oranges later on, and there are apples and oranges. But globally speaking, as advanced economies, we're all confronted by similar challenges. And the question over here is, are there more similarities, or are there more differences? And that's one of the things that we seek to find out. So what do we do? So basically over here, so this is a little bit off, but basically it's 21,500 respondents, 2,000 respondents in all countries except the United States and Norway. In the United States, it's 4,000 simply because it's a very big country for representativeness of the sample, and in Norway, it's 1,500. So it's about 20 minutes long, which gives you about 41 main questions. In Korea, it's 25 minutes to capture the demographic questions as well. It's fielded by YouGov, and basically we concluded our pilot just basically so around basically 28 February to 7 March, so slightly earlier than last month. And we basically did this pilot in 3 countries. The main is expected to, so I can actually give the timeline now already. So the main, what's going to happen is that YouGov is now in the midst of doing the translation, and then it'll be coming back to us to confirm the translation, and then it's going to go out to the field. And then once the field work is done, after that we'll get the data set over here from that. And then we expect it to be made publicly available at a later stage, once, of course, all of us have worked through the data and what's going on. So I'm going to turn to early results. So I'm going to focus over here on 3 sort of sets of early results. The first set of early results is trying to give you a sense of how does the public view these different challenges. Do they view some challenges as more important than the others? The next 2 challenges, so I'm trying to sort of give a little bit flavor over here. I don't have Korean data, but I want to try to show something that I think could be interested to the Korean audience, right? Basically about population aging and sort of the demographic sort of aging. So what do over here in these other countries do they consider as potential solutions? What does the public want? Do they view it as a threat or not? So the first question is, as you said, the question is about how, so the question essentially asks, how worried are you about each of the following? And over here we have 5. So automation, including artificial intelligence, globalization, including international trade, migration, war, and climate change. So over here, you see basically 5 graphs. And then on the x-axis, you see basically from moving from not at all to extremely. So on your right side of the x-axis, basically people worry a lot about that issue. And on the left side of the horizontal axis, they don't worry as much. So that's how, so basically just to read the chart. What you see interestingly for policymakers, right? For policymakers, the one that you think that we are particularly concerned about especially is climate change, because it's sort of this low burning, it's going to basically have knock-on implications substantially, right? But that's not what the public worries about. Neither does the public worry about war, and over here it's for the UK. What seems to be at the top of their mind particularly is globalization, and then migration, and then AI. And you see actually a similar pattern over here for Denmark, right? The biggest concern over here is international trade, is globalization, and then after that followed by sort of migration and AI. Again, you see a similar pattern. War and climate change barely feature at all, which is sort of a little bit of the opposite when you see in the World Economic Forum 2023 report, where they basically said one of the most pressing issues is climate change with its various facets, right? It's got knock-on implications not only on the environment, but it's also knock-on implications on social policy expenditure, because who is going to be affected, and also on industrial policies and jobs. So you sort of start to see that there is a little bit of a divide between the public and sort of policymakers. And in Italy, what do you see? A fairly similar story, but with one exception. AI is sort of their biggest concern over here. And then after that, followed by international trade and migration. So whether it's idiosyncratic to the fact that when this was collected, and earlier last year, Italy basically had something close to some kind of AI law that they tried to pursue, it could be that. I don't know. At this point, also the data, this is a pilot data, it's very small sample size. We're talking about 100 to 200, 200 in the UK, 100 over for basically Denmark and Italy. So I'm not going to make a very big claim over here. But descriptively, at least, there seems to be something interesting. And crucially, what's especially interesting is, again, war and climate change are two things that are not barely featured in the public's mind, but with the huge condition, right? War and climate change will consume most of the public expenditure from countries in terms of fiscal expenditure, but it barely registers in the public's mind in the fact that there will be some kind of trade-off, budgetary at least. The second question that I try to touch on a little bit here, and I'm trying to sort of so there are lots of results. So Manuela will talk specifically about the green transition, but I sort of want to offer a glimpse of a little bit of why it's also on population aging, right? And sort of a worsening dependency ratio. And why I think that this is also important is because the context of all these kind of structural transformations is occurring within a context of population aging, which means that you might have in the longer term, in the medium term and longer term, some kind of sort of budgetary sort of constraints, right? Sort of worsening budgetary constraints because of that. So over here, I'm presenting sort of early results on basically trying to understand, right? Is a worsening dependency ratio an economic problem, and what to do about it? So the question over here that's being asked is please indicate the degree to which you agree or disagree with the following statement. So there are three questions over here that we ask in this battery. The first is that the increasing number of elderly people relative to the working age population poses a threat to a certain country, so whichever country it is, the country's economy. Second, everyone in the country should be allowed to choose early retirement from work, even if it implies a decrease in their standard of living at the time of retirement. So this is a forced trade-off, right? Then we're saying that we're trying to understand what happens when they go into this. And then on the flip side, we present the other side, right? So increasing the retirement age of workers results in fewer job opportunities for younger workers. Would you support that or not? So the first thing, interestingly, all people, so in general, the public, fairly agrees that worsening dependency ratio is an economic threat, right? We can talk about levels over here, but the general picture that you see is that there's an agreement that the economic threat worsens, and it's particularly problematic in Italy, right? Like more people agree more in Italy than in Denmark, right? So there might be some element over here, not just in terms of population, the extent of population aging, because Italy is one of the places that's aging the most and the fastest in Europe, together with Finland, but also about the welfare state configuration. But when we move into the next slide, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So in the trade-off, right, what about early retirement, even if there's a decline in the standard of living during retirement? And you see that there's differences between sort of, on one hand, you have a cluster, which is United Kingdom and Italy, there's sort of a similar pattern. And in Denmark, you see a very different case, right? Danish people are somewhat, you don't see as much, versus in the UK, there's more support for an early retirement, even if there's a decline in standard of living when these people retire. You don't see the same sort of results in the case of Denmark. It's a little bit more lukewarm over there. And to flip on the other side, and this is where the contrast appears the most, Denmark against the rest, right? Or actually Denmark, Italy, and then you see the UK, is you increase the retirement age even if there's less job opportunity for currently younger workers. And you see in the UK, there is agreement. In Denmark, it's very lukewarm. And Italy, there is very strong agreement. So it's you see there are differences already in this case. And then two more things, and then I'll sort of finish off over here in terms of the early results. The second one, sort of a little bit in terms of the flip side of the dependency ratio. So what can we do sort of to boost, right, sort of like replacement rate? Is there anything that can be done over here? We asked 3 questions within the battery. So the question is, in country, people are living longer while fewer children are being born. To tackle this issue, several actions could be taken by decision makers. Please indicate the degree to which you agree or disagree with the following actions. And 3, we sort of almost classic sort of supply side, right? Policies make it easier for immigrants to work in country, ensure free access to high quality public childcare services, and provide cash benefits to families who have more than one child. So the second one over here is almost an attempt to make sort of, for those, to sort of basically the social investment approach. And then the bottom one over here is sort of more of a cash benefit, sort of compensation transfer style. So to make it easier for immigrants to work, by and large, you see a fairly stable pattern across countries. Most people seem to agree, right? I think in general, there's a common agreement about letting migrants in. But that's also a bit interesting if you think, contrast to the sort of rhetoric that's coming up in European countries about that you observe about political discontent and sort of like a little bit sort of anti-immigrant kind of sentiments. Second, ensuring free access to high-quality public childcare services is almost universally sort of strong agreement across the board. And this is sort of well-founded also in the literature, that people tend to support sort of social investment policies, like services policies. But when it comes to transfers, and then you see a huge difference over here, right? So UK and Italy sort of fall within the same category, and Denmark is a sort of very different outlier over here. And again, it might have something to do, again, with the existing welfare state, where maybe that people already think that there is no need to compensate for an already generous welfare state in the universal Nordic welfare state, right? So that could be that, where we're talking about sort of a certain threshold of opinion where people don't actually move beyond that. But again, this, I want to say, so these are early findings that are sort of to capture the sort of variation results, which are sort of interesting so this, a lot of it is probing country level variation. But we'll see with more data sets, I think, with more countries, I think that probes the question even further. That allows us to probe the question even further. And on the final one, so we want to take a look also at medical care in old age. And one of it, so the solution over here, you have skilled labor shortage, right? We have a lack of labor, and to my understanding, if I understood correctly, in Korea, there's also a strike among medical doctors. Part of the reason was an attempt to sort of increase the supply of medical doctors. And so in some countries, obviously, I know at least in the case of Singapore, they're talking about having AI involved in it. So the question over here we're trying to understand is, so what do we do about it? Is the public comfortable about having various facets of AI being involved in basically, dealing with these issues? So we ask, how comfortable or uncomfortable do you feel about the following uses of technology? Robots to perform surgery with human supervision, AI to diagnose diseases with human supervision, and AI-enabled robots for companionship in old age. So basically, when it comes to robots to perform surgery with human supervision, we tend to see general agreement across the board. So over here to read the scale, it's a scale from 1 to 7, for which on the left-hand side, it's very uncomfortable. On the right-hand side, it's very comfortable. So more supportive. On the left-hand side, more opposed to. And you see that in general, Italy and UK supported more people in Italy and UK. In Denmark, they're a lot more lukewarm. You see again the same pattern over here. Using AI to diagnose diseases, again, Denmark stands off somewhat as an outlier over here, that it's a bit more lukewarm compared to the UK and Italy. And finally, in terms of AI-enabled robots for companionship, on the other hand, you see a little bit more support in Denmark compared to the UK and Italy. I'm going to talk a little bit about these two things first, so sort of potential idea. It could also be due to the fact of whether there is a shortage in supply, basically on the side of basically medical services. And basically in the UK, so correct me if I'm wrong, right, that there is actually queues and stuff at the NHS, versus like in the Danish system, it seems that the queue is still not so bad at the current system. Italy, I'm not as sure, so I can't make sort of what's going on over there. But I guess what over here, then you have AI-enabled robots for companionship and old age, and I think that this is also sort of the interesting dynamic. So what I'm trying to get at over here before I move on to the final slides to sort of conclude is that you have the same sort of shock that's coming in, the sort of same structural transformation that's coming in that could offer similar policy solutions to various policymakers. But due to the existing sort of idiosyncrasies of various countries, be it their political economy, but also more of a cultural aspect, the same solution might not work out as well in different things, right? So, and I think that that's one thing that we are trying to probe over here, both at the academic level, but has implications for policy. So, as a final note, so key preliminary findings, what do we find? In general, the public seems to be more concerned about globalization, automation, and migration compared to climate change and war. And of course, what's surprising, I mean, in a way, it's not really surprising, but in a way, it's surprising. Climate change and war, these are two things that perhaps you could say are more sort of a slow burn kind of thing. You don't really know when it's going to occur, especially for climate change. And maybe that's why the public sort of discounts that compared to the other thing. But of course, the second thing is the element, of just general political discourse. The second, on dependency ratio, we see that there is generally an agreement that it's an economic threat, but however, albeit with sort of intra and inter-country variation on support for early retirement and extended working lives, even when there are trade-offs. And then for free public childcare, then in terms of how do we sort of improve the sort of replacement rate, or basically the labor supply, right? You see over here, there's again a sort of hierarchy. People would prefer free public childcare services, then sort of followed by immigration, and the last is sort of cash benefits for parents. But of course, there's variation across policy types and across countries. And then lastly, AI for medical age and old age, there's variation across countries, with Denmark as an outlier in both cases. So in sum, variation in public opinion, as I said, about different challenges. Over here, we have very small data. I think once we come up with more, I think we can talk about it more substantively. Second, some solutions are more supported than others. And I think this is the crucial aspect, that the public, it seems, shows appetite to absorb some policy trade-offs that we often think that they are not willing to, right? But to what degree is a separate question. And third, it seems that at least the basis of these three countries, which represent three distinct welfare regimes, but also very different sort of basically labor market relation systems, right? So industrial relation systems. There's variation across countries, and sort of a return to sort of the comparative political economy approach. How to understand structural transformations through the lens of comparative political economy to understand sort of variations in public opinion, I think could be sort of useful for us. That's the end. I would like to just also say, as a final note, I'll just sort of leave it over here because I think it's sort of important for everyone. So this is the team that is behind it all, again. And then I also want to really thank the second name on the team, which is, her name is Caroline Delaporte, who's actually lead for the entire project. She's taken charge and also been financing. I mean, part of the finances for the survey is also through the Renew Consortium, and that's also why we have a lot of the Nordic countries involved, and why it's basically part of a Nordic financing instrument. So thank you very much.